Greetings from the Idaho Bluegrass Association. This is Gary Eller speaking from Pickles Butte, Idaho. We have prepared a series of podcasts featuring bluegrass musicians who have deep roots and connections with Southwest Idaho who have gone on to become nationally prominent. This is a collaboration between the Idaho Bluegrass Association, the Idaho Songs Project, National Old-Time Fiddlers, and Utah State University. Well, greetings everybody from Pickles Butte, Idaho. This is Gary Eller, continuing the IBA podcast series. Today is the 4th of March, 2021, and we're delighted to have today the awesome Becky Smith. How you doing, Becky?
I'm doing great.
Well, thanks for agreeing to chat with us. We'd like to pick your brain about your fascinating musical career. How did you get interested in playing music when you were a kid?
Well, I was fortunate to have an older brother, Malcolm Smith, who was a musician from the get-go, and being his little sister, any instrument he played, he would pass along to me and get me to play and help him with his practices. And I'd always get his hand-me-downs as he went from one instrument to another.
Well, so you really were playing lots of different kinds of instruments along the way.
Yeah, but mostly strings. My brother did piano, but I kind of skipped the piano part. I guess ukulele would be the first instrument, and then guitar.
All right, so it sounds as though your brother was one of your mentors and musical heroes.
Oh, definitely. Oh, I was just going to say that you asked about where I was born and all that. I was actually born in Texas, in Port Arthur, Texas, and we lived in a little town near there, next to Port Arthur, called Groves, Texas. And let's see, I was about 8, and then we moved to England. We moved to the United Kingdom, and, the whole family. My father was a foreman at the Gulf oil refinery there in Port Arthur, and then he got a job offer to build a new refinery and get a managerial position in Wales. And so the whole family moved from Groves, Texas to London, England, and then we moved out to Wales for another 4 years, which was awesome experience, and then back to London. And my brother started specializing in first classical guitar and then flamenco guitar. And he studied with some of the greatest flamenco teachers that were around in the 60s there in London. And of course, I was his sidekick, and the first gigs we ever did were Malcolm on flamenco guitar and me on castanets.
Very interesting.
and I would back him up with playing rhythmic stuff on classical guitar, and he would do flamenco.
Did he talk you into dancing too?
No, I didn't get to do the dancing part. So that was a huge part of the music. And of course, the music in the 60s in the UK was amazing, and we got to be around the Beatles and the Stones and all of that, and as well as the resurgence in the Celtic music and the Irish music, all of that with John Renbourn and Burt Yanks and that whole era. So we were heavily influenced with all of that, and actually 1970, we moved back to the States, to Houston, Texas. And by then, my brother started at college, and he took violin. And so then we started playing fiddle tunes. And I started playing steel string guitar to back him up. So that was early 70s. And we started going to the fiddle contest there in Texas, in the Houston area. So that's where we first actually heard about Weezer and that whole contest style, and we were very fortunate to be able to sort of be taken under the wing of some of these great fiddle players there in the area that were nice to be inclusive of us, because we were, I guess, basically your typical hippie type folks And the redneck Texans frowned on us at first at the fiddle contests, but then we never went away, and we got better, we got good, so they started liking us.
A wonderful thing, isn't it, that music bridges the gap between the hippies and the rednecks?
Yeah, and that greater Houston area was perfect for that, and it was a real melting pot of all kinds of world music going on, and at the same time we got to be involved with the Russian Balalaika Society down there and got to play Russian music, and of course we started playing Irish music and Celtic music and old-timey music and just all kinds of acoustic music. But going to the fiddle contests and that whole scene was just amazing, and the enthusiasm of the players, and we got to be friends with, people that later we found out were really famous in the genre, like, E.J. Hopkins was a big one, and Bill Northcutt was tremendous. I don't think Bill Northcutt ever made it up to Weezer, but he was a huge influence, and a lot of the Idahoans that we met up here had gone down to Texas and, studied a lot with Bill Northcutt, and he was just great in particular. Later, when I started playing mandolin, Bill Northcutt would always go out of his way to include me, which was, I had a lot of things going against me because I was a girl and I was a player, and guys like Bill Northcutt and E.J. Hopkins and the Morris family. Terry Morris was, these were all kids at the time, and just their playing was just so inventive and creative and fun, and we just had a blast playing with those guys. And like I said, they were so nice to include us.
Well, was there a bluegrass element in the early days for you?
Well, yeah. We started going to this South Texas hoedown outside of Houston, and we would go up there, and I guess it was like a weekend contest, and we'd go up on a Friday night and camp out at a park near there, and then they would have the contest and then have like bluegrass bands play in intermission. And we met local guys that were bluegrass players, so we started playing bluegrass with them as well as doing the Texas style. And then, eventually we, of course, formed a band of our own, out of all those friends and stuff. We had more or less a bluegrass band, but we always did other music too. So we were what you'd call a progressive bluegrass band now.
You certainly have an eclectic musical background, and I admire you for that.
Well, we were very lucky because in the 70s, the Houston area was just when people started touring, and we were all students at the University of Houston. And, they would bring in Doc Watson, and early on we got to, see those guys and get turned on by that. And then, of course, any band that came in town, we got to be friends with. And Country Gazette, they were really helpful to us, and they would come and give us all pointers on, how to play and let us play with them. And same thing when Sam Bush came in town and Newgrass Revival, and we just became friends with all those people. So we developed that network, I guess you'd call it, of these friends. And pretty soon we're on the festival circuit there in Texas. Kerrville started having festivals, so we became like a house band for Kerrville.
What was the name of your band?
We were the Cypress Swamp Stompers.
The Cypress Swamp Stompers. Let's listen to the Cypress Swamp Stompers, performing a song they wrote called Swamp Fever from a CD that Becky compiled called A Tribute and Treasure, from tapes of performances including Becky and her brother Malcolm Smith. Other performers on this recording are Pat Fowler on guitar, Ron Rebstock on banjo, and Zeke Zuelke on bass. Becky played mandolin and Malcolm played fiddle.
we were lucky too. There was this, well, it's still there, but we played at Anderson Fair, which was is a small fair in Montrose, Houston. And that was a hotbed of all the Texas singer-songwriters. And we were a band, so we would have these guys open for us, like Lyle Lovett, Nancy Griffith,
great,
Lucinda. Well, we were actually in the Lucinda band for a while, but it was a small community, and we were one of the few actual bands that played at that club, because they usually had just like Townsend's and single Texas singer-songwriter guys.
Kerrville has a mystical feeling about it to me, and the one thing that's constant in music is that it's always changing, evolving, and so I imagine Kerrville is not the same as it was in the earliest days, or perhaps I'm wrong about that.
Well, I haven't been back myself in a long time, but Rod Kennedy, who the very first time he had a bluegrass festival, it was the Kerrville Bluegrass Festival, and he tried a country festival and the folk festival. And the folk festival is what survived, and it turned into a 2-week-long thing. But the bluegrass festivals were great, and we had Country Gazette and Hot Rise and, all these new bands, Buck White and, Ricky Skaggs, and just that whole crew in the mid-'70s was amazing, all the musicians. We just got to play with those guys, and it was just so amazing and so fun. And let's see, in 1981, I got the call from Mike Marshall and Daryl Anger from California, and they had a band that needed me to come and play mandolin with them. So I moved to California initially to play with the Robin Fowler band, which was there in the Bay Area. And Daryl's wife at the time, Barbara Higbee, was playing in that band. And Mike and Daryl were playing with the David Grisman Quintet at the time, too. So that was awesome, because I got to go and share a house with those guys 24/7. Anyway, I was ready to move on, and it was a great opportunity there to go to California and play and learn from all those guys. And then actually there is when I started playing in the most bluegrass band I've ever been in, and that was a band called Heartland. And that was an awesome band with incredible players, all youngsters, of course, at that time. And they were amazing, and they covered all the great bluegrass harmony singing, and it was just wonderful to play with those guys.
Here's a song from the Heartland Band. It's a recording of The Tie That Binds. That's a classic Reno and Smiley bluegrass song. Becky says, "When I was in the first lineup of the band, they never did any recording. This is a recording from a live radio show on KPFA in Berkeley, California, August 12, 1982. The musicians are Amy Stenberg, guitar and vocals, Debby Cotter, banjo and harmony, Tom Enguidanos, dobro and harmony, Avram Siegel bass, Becky on mandolin, and Malcolm on fiddle."
I hate to part this way. Our right by your side, and I will shed some bitter tears. My love I cannot hide. Well, maybe you will change your mind, and if you do, someday you'll find that you were wrong and I was right about the tie that binds. Well, maybe you will change your mind, and if you do, someday you'll find that you were wrong and I was right about the tie that binds, about the tie that binds.
Well, how long were you in California? And then how did that bring you to Idaho?
Well, we moved to California. It was about 80, 81, 82, and then in 1983, we all came up here to Weezer, and they had been coming up to Weezer already for I don't know how many years, and we had heard about Weezer, of course, from all our Texas contest players and friends. So, yeah, 1983 came up to Weezer, and of course had a blast and made a whole lot of new friends and saw so many of our Texas friends that driven all the way up from Houston area to Weezer, and that was amazing. And so it was just wonderful. And then in 87, that's when I had my son, and we thought about moving out of the Bay Area just because it was so crowded. And so my husband got a job offer at Hewlett-Packard in Boise there. So we came up here, and one of the main reasons we took that job is we knew Weezer happened once a year.
Well, that's great.
So we knew that, oh man, all our friends would be coming up here at least once a year, and we'd see everybody. So in 88 is when we moved up here, and of course, been here ever since.
I've done probably about 30 interviews at this point. Not all of them are interviews of musicians. You know, I've interviewed cops and mayors and everything else. One thing that is so clear is that the music scene here would be very different if there were no Weezer.
You know, when we moved here in 88, of course, immediately got in touch with the Idaho Bluegrass Association and, of course, started making all the new friends. A couple of the folks we had already met from coming up to Weezer previously, and I would go and sit in with, I think, Ragged But Right was still playing then, and, you know, Mike and Donna Bond and Glenn Garrett and all those guys, and we would just play, and pretty soon I became the president of the Bluegrass Association.
Oh, that I did not know. So what was that period of time?
Well, that was 89, 90, 91, around in there.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was fun, and at that time I had this huge network of musicians, national touring bands, and I did a series in Broad Country Gazette, and all my friends that get them gigs in Boise, and we tried that out, and it was pretty good, but I tell you, I had a tough time getting folks to show up. It kind of surprised me. I had the top players in the country come through here, and not all of the members of the Bluegrass Association would even come.
Well, I tell some of my bluegrass friends, if you really love this music, then you will go buy tickets and buy CDs.
Well, the problem at the time, there wasn't good venues here in Boise area.
That may be different now.
It's definitely changed recently, but it seemed like all through the 90s, at least, it was just very frustrating, and couldn't get a band up here, and, you know, didn't pay enough to get a band up here. And I would go back on tour myself with my Texas singer-songwriter friends and do tours Texas and Florida and Alabama and, you know, back east, and never could get the tour out this way because there's just not enough support for it.
Anybody who's played music professionally for a long time has amazing stories to tell about being on the road. Do you have any anecdotes that are funny, sad, happy, ironic?
Oh, well, this one tour, when we did a tour from Houston to North Carolina, and we toured in a super stretch limo with 8 women singer-songwriters, and me, accompanist for them, in a super stretch limo all the way from Houston to Wilmington, North Carolina. And I swear, they stopped at every Walmart in between.
That's funny.
That was funny, I tell you what. And the limo driver, he was hilarious. He didn't ever need to sleep, and he kind of worried me because we would drive like all night. And I was going, I don't understand why this guy doesn't need to sleep. And
how's this story going to turn out in the end?
I know, so I would sit up there with him to keep him company and make sure the guy didn't fall asleep.
2 questions I always ask people at the end. The first is, what can the Idaho Bluegrass Association do to encourage more young people to get involved in traditional music?
Well, they just have to have constant jam, open jam sessions and opportunities for kids to see the players play and play. They just need to have more and more things like that, where they're inclusive and the kids feel comfortable and that they just see the joy and experience the fun that it is of playing with other people and be inspired. And I mean, for me, it's just all about this enthusiasm because you're creating, and what you create with other people when you're having these musical conversations is magical.
Bring your kids to Weezer.
Yeah, Weezer is great, but it's just once a year, so there needs to be a constant place. And in Houston, Bill Northcutt, he had a music store, and there was just always jamming at the music store, and there were just plenty of open jams like that for people to go to and see. And it's great what Jason Homey has done with the intermediate jams. We just need more of that, and of course with this pandemic, it's kind of put a crimp on that, but as soon as we can, we got to just get back to more picking. And there's so many fabulous young players now that should be inspiring all these kids. It's just like an incredible amount of wonderful talent coming out, all these young great players, and a lot of these great young players did come from jamming at Weezer. It's amazing how much Weezer has influenced the whole musical scene. A lot of the young players that were itty-bitty kids growing up in that environment, and then they'd go off to Berkeley School of Music and meet other kids, and it's just phenomenal what's going on with that.
Well, Becky, we really appreciate your taking the time to share your story. Quite a fascinating trip you had. Are there any additional concluding comments you might want to add?
Well, I should mention about Stickerville and how we're coming up to, 20 years ago is when the collective bought the property there, affectionately known as Stickerville, and started hosting our own workshops and jams and things like that. And of course, we'll keep doing that to encourage the whole scene. And everybody's just hoping for this pandemic to get under control so that we can start doing all that again.
Well, Becky, I look forward to picking with you again as soon as possible. Again, thank you for the interview and all you've done, which is an enormous amount for music in Southwest Idaho. Your leadership at Stickerville is inspiring, and I don't know how many music students you've had over the years, but it's got to be in the hundreds, thousands maybe. So thanks again, Becky.
Okay, we'll talk again soon.